The lighthouse had been empty for years. Everyone said it was too far from town, too battered by storms, too lonely to bother fixing. But on this night, one light burned steady in the highest window. I should probably turn back soon, Evan thought. But in spite of himself, he continued to follow the shoreline, shoes soft against the damp sand, jacket pulled close to guard against the ocean wind. The sky was a deep blue velvet, scattered with stars. He hadn't planned to come. He hadn't planned to think about him. But he was here. By the time he reached the iron door at the base of the lighthouse, his fingers were cold. He hesitated for just a beat. Then he knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Theo stood there in a loose sweater, sleeves rolled to his forearms, the light from the lantern brushing his face in gold and shadow. His dark hair was still damp, like he had just come in from the sea. He looked surprised for half a second, then his expression softened into something warmer. "You came," Theo said quietly. Evan swallowed. "I did." They stood there, the wind pulling at Evan's jacket, the ocean breathing far below them. Neither of them moved out of the doorway. Then Theo stepped inside. "Come in." Inside, the lighthouse was nothing like Evan expected. Not cold or industrial, but warm and lived in. Books stacked near the stairs. A small table with 2 mugs. A blanket draped across a worn leather chair. The spiral staircase rose through the center in long, gentle curves. Evan slipped off his jacket. Theo took it without a word and hung it on a hook by the door. Their fingers brushed for just a second. "You have the place to yourself tonight?" Evan asked. Theo nodded. Storm is supposed to hit later. Everyone cleared out before sunset. Evan tried to pretend that wasn't the reason he was here. They moved into the lower sitting room. The lantern cast soft shadows that shifted with every movement. The wind hummed against the lighthouse walls, steady and distant. Theo poured tea into 2 mugs and handed one to Evan. "Chamomile," he said. "You once said it helped you sleep." Evan looked at him. "You remembered that?" Theo met his eyes. "I remember more than that." Silence settled between them, but it was comfortable, familiar. They sat across from each other at first, talked about small things, about the town, about the weather, about a boat that had broken loose from its mooring last week. Their voices stayed quiet, like they were afraid to wake the night. At some point, without either of them mentioning it, they moved closer. Theo settled beside Evan on the edge of the couch. Their knees touched. Neither of them moved away. "I almost turned back," Evan admitted. Theo looked at him. "Why didn't you?" Evan traced the rim of his mug with his thumb. "Because every night I did, I'd think about what would have happened if I hadn't." Theo's breath changed. The smallest shift. Evan felt it more than he saw it. "You could have stayed away," Theo said softly. "I tried." The wind picked up, rattling faintly against the glass high above them. Theo set his mug down first, then Evan did the same. Without speaking, Theo leaned back into the couch, just enough that Evan could follow. Evan hesitated for only a moment before shifting closer, their shoulders brushing, then settling fully together. Theo's warmth was immediate and grounding. He smelled faintly of salt and rust. "I didn't expect you tonight," Theo said. "I didn't expect myself," Evan answered honestly. Another quiet stretch. Theo shifted slightly. His fingers brushed up against Evan's hand by accident at first, then stayed light and deliberate. The touch wasn't rushed. It wasn't demanding. It was a question. Evan answered it by turning his palm upward and letting her fingers lace together. Theo exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Outside, the ocean surged against the rocks below. Inside, everything felt suspended, balanced on something fragile and deliberate. They didn't kiss. Not yet. Instead, Theo leaned his head back against the couch, and after a moment, Evan rested his head against Theo's shoulder. It felt natural, like it had always meant to be this way, and they had only taken a long way around to find it. I used to come up here when I couldn't sleep, Theo said quietly. Before they shut the place down, I would sit by the lantern and listen to the waves. It felt like the world was being held together by sound. Evan smiled faintly. You never told me that. Theo turned his head just enough that Evan could feel the movement. You never asked. Theo turned his head just enough that Evan could feel the movement. He never asked. Evan closed his eyes. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt different up here. The storm arrived slowly. First the wind, then the rain tapping soft against the glass. Theo shifted slightly. Evan felt the movement through his chest, through his side. He could feel Theo's breathing now, slow and even. Stay, Theo said quietly. It was not a demand, not a plea, just a simple ask offered into the space between them. Evan opened his eyes. I already am. Theo turned then just enough that they were facing each other, their knees still touching, their hands still woven together. The space between their faces was small, close enough to feel breath, close enough that the air itself felt warm. Tell me if you want me to stop, Theo said. Evan's voice was barely above a whisper. I won't. Theo leaned in. The kiss wasn't hurried, gentle. The first contact was only the lightest brush of lips, as if they were still checking if this was real. Then a second, slightly deeper, and a third that lingered just long enough for warmth to bloom through Evan's chest. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't desperate. It was patient. When they finally pulled apart, they both smiled. The rain grew heavier outside. Theo lifted his free hand and ran his thumb along Evan's jaw, slow and thoughtful. Evan closed his eyes again, not because the room was dark, but because the moment felt too bright to look at it directly. Come upstairs, Theo said quietly. They rose together, hands still linked, and began the slow spiral climb. The storm wrapped around the lighthouse as they ascended. Wind pressed against the stone. Rain slid down the glass in silver lines. At the top, the lantern room glowed like a quiet sanctuary. A bed had been set up near the window. Simple, clean. A soft blanket folded carefully at the foot. Theo paused at the doorway, suddenly uncertain. Evan stepped closer. You still want me to stay? Theo answered by pulling him gently into his arms. They lay down fully clothed, the blanket pulled over them against the chill. Theo's arm settled around Evan's waist. Evan's head fit naturally beneath Theo's chin. The storm outside grew louder, but inside, everything softened. Theo's heartbeat was steady against Evan's ear. Tonight feels like borrowed time, Evan murmured. Then let's spend it slowly, Theo replied. They did. No rush, no striving, only the quiet awareness of two bodies breathing in the same rhythm. The lighthouse light turned in its slow circle overhead, over and over, steady, constant. At some point, Evan drifted half into sleep. He felt Theo press a kiss into his hair, light and protective. The storm passed in the early hours of the morning. The ocean steadied. And for a while, in the quiet between tides, neither of them felt alone.